Welcome to NTD News. I'm Jasmina Davis. Here are today's top stories. White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany says some election lawsuits probably will reach the Supreme Court. It's an outcome President Trump had predicted prior to the election, citing concerns over mail-in voter fraud. An Arizona Superior Court judge ruled on an election-related lawsuit in the state. He ruled to keep the case records unsealed, but personal information from the ballots will be redacted. Joe Biden is not currently receiving daily national intelligence briefings. Intelligence officials have refused contact with any transition team until a winner is clear. This as the Biden campaign seeks help from supporters to fund the fight against Trump's lawsuits. Former General Robert Spalding spoke to Yanya Kellick from American Thought Leaders on how this entire year has been dominated by actions from the Chinese Communist Party. He discussed the regime's role in spreading the virus and its impact on our country. And small businesses sue the governor of California over his lockdowns. They argue he doesn't have the authority to make that decision. President Trump's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, says roughly 650,000 unlawful ballots were cast in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. Giuliani told Fox that almost none of the ballots were observed by Republican poll watchers as they were counted. State election law requires the presence of poll watchers from all parties. Pennsylvania Governor Tom Wolf's office claims ballot watchers from all parties had observers throughout the process. A few days earlier, Giuliani said the Trump campaign may have sufficient evidence to change the election results in the state of Pennsylvania. He told Fox News earlier that lawsuits might show as many as 900,000 invalid ballots were cast in the battleground state. In the midst of several lawsuits, White House Press Secretary and Trump campaign advisor Kayleigh McEnany said the Supreme Court probably will play a role in the presidential election. The campaign has lawsuits in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and a number of other states.
White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany, commenting on the several lawsuits over the 2020 election, said she believes some cases will reach the Supreme Court. Speaking to Just the News, she said, "Right now we're at the district court level. I think at this point it probably will make its way up to the Supreme Court." McEnany added that Trump's campaign also has more information on a Michigan case about ballots, which will be released in the near future. She addressed a topic that saw her cut off partway through her speech on Fox News on Monday. She was talking about the benefits of voter identification. She said it's a tenet of the Republican Party to support voter identification because to not support it welcomes fraud. It's a basic principle, and it's one that I don't believe should be censored by the media but allowed to be said. Fox News faced backlash from conservatives on social media following the move. And how is the president taking the events surrounding the election? McEnany said President Trump is in great spirits.
Democratic candidate Joe Biden's lead in Arizona has shrunk to 0.3%. A 0.1% margin would trigger an automatic recount. There are between 20 and 30,000 votes still to count, meaning it could still swing either way. A lawsuit in Maricopa County represents several hundred votes in the state.
In a lawsuit over rejected votes in Maricopa County, an Arizona Superior Court judge has ruled to unseal evidence provided by the Trump campaign. He also ruled to redact any identifying information about the voters. That would include social security numbers, birthdays, and signatures. The lawsuit alleges that some in-person votes were disregarded because of improper guidance provided by poll workers. The Trump campaign sought entry of a protective order as well as an order to seal the record. Protective seals are commonly requested in election law cases. That's due to the vast amount of personal information contained in documents. County attorneys filed a separate motion in response to ask that the court keep the evidence unsealed. It read, "This case is substantively different from your typical election challenge, as it goes to the heart of election integrity. It also calls the allegations by witnesses baseless." County attorneys took issue with the video footage to be submitted as evidence by the Trump campaign. They said, according to Arizona law, it is a Class 2 misdemeanor to take photographs or videos within the 75-foot limit around polling locations while voters are present.
Now we'll take a look at updates in Georgia's razor-thin presidential race. Biden gained some ground in the state with a few thousand more blue votes. The Trump campaign is now saying they have evidence that deceased people supposedly cast ballots in the state. Let's take a closer look at that evidence.
The Trump campaign posted a news release outlining at least 4 people who are deceased, but who also registered to vote this year. For example, a woman named Deborah Jean Christensen from Roswell, Georgia, who died on May of 2019, but someone still registered to vote for her on October 5th. And a man named James Blowett from Covington, Georgia, reportedly cast a ballot last week, but he died in 2006. There were 2 other examples also listed in the news release. The Trump campaign cited voter records and death notices to back up their claims. Georgia's Secretary of State didn't answer requests to comment on the allegations. This as Biden is leading in the state by less than 0.3 of a percentage point. And the Senate race is now under the microscope for possible illegal activities too. Some Democrats, including former presidential candidate Andrew Yang, have suggested out-of-state liberals move to Georgia to vote in the Senate races. If 2 Democrats flip those Senate seats, that could mean a Democratic majority in the Senate. Yang wrote on Twitter that he and his wife were moving to Georgia to help Democrats Ossoff and Warnock win, and that it's the only way to give Biden a unified government. Democrat state representative and Trump supporter Vernon Jones wrote on Twitter that such an action would undermine the integrity of our election, and says he's calling on Georgia's governor to outlaw it. Reporting by Melina Weisskopf, NTV News.
And now Georgia's Secretary of State is ordering a vote recount by hand. That's after pressure mounting from Trump's campaign team and Congressman Doug Collins. The recount is expected to be finished by the end of November. And pressure is building up over the state's Senate races. Both seats will have a runoff this year. Florida Senator Marco Rubio went there to campaign for the 2 GOP senators yesterday. Our Atlanta team brings us more from Georgia.
Georgia's Secretary of State announced that 97 of the state's 159 counties have sent their final numbers as of Wednesday afternoon. As it now stands, Biden leads Trump by just over 14,000 votes.
With the margin being so close, it will require a full by-hand recount in each county. This will help build confidence. It will be an audit, a recount, and a recanvass all at once.
He says the recount should be finished by the state's November 20th deadline, and the next step is getting the final county certifications in. Then he will choose which race will be subject to an audit.
With that, under my powers under the health emergency, I am moving the date of the December 1st election to coincide with the federal runoff on January 5th.
As it looks now, both of Georgia's Senate races will have a runoff in January, and this could determine the balance of power in the U.S. Senate this year. Florida Senator Marco Rubio even traveled to the state Wednesday afternoon to help his fellow Republicans campaign.
Not all Democrats are socialists, but all the socialists are Democrats. They're members of the House. You may know who they are. Members of the Socialist Party, but they run as Democrats. They're in that party. And these aren't like fringe elements. They have real influence. When they speak, people jump. What stands in the way of all that becoming public policy in America? Even half of it becoming public policy in America. You, through your vote in this race.
Current numbers show Republican Senator Kelly Loeffler trailing behind her Democrat challenger Raphael Warnock in Georgia's special election. But Loeffler is still working hard to gain ground quickly.
All eyes in this country are on Georgia. We are going to save the country.
And some Georgians tell us they're surprised that Senator David Perdue may face a runoff this year too.
But at the end of the day, we were a little bit surprised that Senator Perdue's race went into a runoff because he clearly is in the lead.
I think if we recount all the votes and all the legal votes in Georgia, and we clarify a lot of the votes that came in via mail-in ballot which didn't have signature verification on them, David might escape a runoff, but we're preparing for a runoff either way.
Because I like freedom and democracy. We need trust, truth and transparency for the America and Americans. And this election we don't know what's going on.
Senator Rubio took the opportunity to share that he's shocked by the level of peer censorship and self-censorship going on in America.
Believe whatever you want, but these kids are terrified. They're terrified that they're gonna fail that course or get a bad grade if they don't agree with the crazy. There are people in America who work in places where they are afraid to put a bumper sticker on their car or wear a hat because they can get fired.
With such a razor-thin presidential race and both Senate seats facing a runoff, it's expected that all eyes will be fixed on Georgia for the coming weeks. Reporting by Roland Reed and Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
Indiana Attorney General Curtis Hill is joining other Republicans in arguing that the Pennsylvania Supreme Court overstepped its authority by allowing voters 3 additional days to cast ballots. He filed an amicus brief with the United States Supreme Court. Hill joins 5 other Republican attorneys general from other states in the lawsuit. The brief argues that the state's legislature chooses the point at which states stop receiving absentee ballots and start counting votes. They say state courts like Pennsylvania Supreme Court don't have the jurisdiction to do that. Pennsylvania voters had 50 days to return their absentee ballots to ensure they were received by Election Day. The brief argues failure to meet the deadline was not the fault of state election law, and that other courts upheld Election Day receipt deadlines before and during the pandemic. Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden is not getting national security information. That's as intelligence officials say they won't connect with Biden's team until a clear winner of the election is determined.
U.S. intelligence officials are not in contact with Biden's transition team. That's because the General Service Administration, or GSA, has not yet decided who won the election. In an email statement to NTD's sister media, the Epoch Times, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence said the agency follows the statutory direction and that they would not have contact with any transition team until notified by the GSA. The GSA previously said they will only initiate the transition when a winner is clear. Under a 1933 law, the GSA is the one that decides when a winner is determined. It then authorizes the president-elect to communicate with federal agencies and provides funding to the transition team. Biden was asked on Tuesday about not getting intelligence briefings. He said the presidential daily brief would be useful, but it's not necessary. Despite lacking a final call from GSA, Biden's transition officials told the Washington Post they have already started working through informal channels to learn what's going on in the government. That's through talking with organizations close to the government and former federal staff members.
No doubt.
Meanwhile, Biden has already made phone calls to foreign leaders, including the UK and Canadian prime ministers, Germany's chancellor, and the French president. President Trump says the election is not over. His campaign is fighting legal battles against potential election fraud and illegal actions in battleground states. NTD won't call the presidential race until all challenges are resolved. So far, in states including Michigan and Nevada, lawsuits have been filed containing affidavits of poll watchers and witnesses alleging irregularities and frauds. Meanwhile, Biden's lead in Arizona has slowly decreased as new bundles of ballots are added to the count. Penny Zhou, NTD News.
And the Biden campaign is fundraising to fight Trump campaign lawsuits in battleground states. It emailed supporters earlier this week asking to help raise $30 million. So far, the Trump campaign has filed lawsuits in Pennsylvania, Arizona, Georgia, Nevada, and Michigan. Some have been dismissed, but others are making their way through the courts. The Biden campaign says this much litigation is expensive, and they need to be able to afford the legal battles ahead. And there have been reports of a computer glitch where thousands of votes were taken from one presidential nominee to the other in the 2020 election. The latest report comes from Wisconsin.
Among several key swing states, evidence of supposed glitches in vote counting software have emerged following the election and in recent days. The Trump campaign and other right-wing groups speculate these glitches transferred votes meant for President Trump over to Democrat nominee Joe Biden. Major media outlets reported that these allegations are false. On CNN, officials from Wisconsin and Michigan said they do not believe anything wrong occurred in their state's elections.
What we've got to talk about really is to leave the conspiracy theories behind.
This election was smooth, secure, transparent, and accurate.
Fluctuations in the voting numbers reported on election night can indicate otherwise. According to a Twitter post from a data scientist, Michigan counted almost 150,000 votes within 5 seconds, and less than 6,000 of them were for Trump. And Virginia's vote count was reduced by over 100,000 votes in the early hours of the morning. The data scientist also told us she found Wisconsin had an average count of 325 votes per second, while Washington hit a peak of over 130,000 vote counts per second. And in one video, what looks to be CNN's 2020 election coverage showed 20,000 votes in Pennsylvania being transferred from Trump to Biden. Other reported glitches have caused separate issues. Wisconsin election workers had to duplicate over 13,000 ballots because of a printing error, which meant every ballot had to be opened and read.
American thought leaders interviewed General Robert Spalding, where he spoke about the impact of the Chinese Communist Party has on America. He said the entire premise of 2020 has been about the Chinese Communist Party.
Robert Spalding, a retired Air Force Brigadier General and Senior Fellow at the Hudson Institute, said this entire year has been dominated by the actions of the Chinese Communist Party because 2020 has really been about the coronavirus. He said that the CCP enabled the spread of the virus through international air travel when they blocked domestic air travel within China. He said the CCP locked down PPE masks around the world, put pressure on the World Health Organization to not talk about human-to-human transmission, encouraged panic on social media, and spread disinformation that the virus originated from the United States and Spain.
What does it have to do with the CCP? Why did we have massive mail-in ballots? Because of the coronavirus. Why do we have the coronavirus? Because of the Chinese Communist Party. When you add all of these things together, the actions by the Chinese Communist Party deliberately impacted the U.S. election.
He went on to say that the actions of the CCP promoted a narrative that the U.S. wasn't handling the pandemic well compared to China, putting the blame on President Trump rather than on the CCP, who was responsible for spreading it to the United States. According to Spalding, the cultural, political, and academic landscape with things like critical race theory and social justice programs mirrors that of the oppressive communist regime in China.
We are, in 2020, in the midst of a people's war waged by the Chinese Communist Party around the world to essentially destroy liberalism. And in many ways, we're cooperating because we censor ourselves. I could look at the United States and see many of the same things that were happening in China. In other words, widespread censorship, widespread oppression of views. In other words, there's only one truth, and that's the truth of the Chinese Communist Party issues. And if you have another opinion, then you're isolated.
Spalding said that the intelligence community and journalists may dispute the party's impact on the world because there's no hard paper trail. But he said the CCP is one of the most secretive organizations in the world that would never telegraph what they were doing unless there was a major crisis in the country. According to him, knowing how the CCP operates, the link between the regime and 2020 is very clear. Unlike American legacy media and other countries, Russia and China have not yet congratulated Joe Biden for being named president-elect by the media.
They both understand that in America, you still have rule of law. And they saw in 2000 that there was a disputed election for 37 days. Somebody was promoted as the president-elect, and then on the 37th day, we had somebody else.
Spalding said that he thinks China and Russia are hedging their bets and waiting for the results to play out. Christina Kim, NTD News.
Coming up, the U.S. Postal Service whistleblower in Pennsylvania says he's standing by his statement. He also says he's been coerced by investigators to retract his claims. More on that after the break. In Connecticut, the result of the race for the House is being changed. An error in the voting system apparently called the wrong winner. Connecticut Republican House Representative Craig Fishbein was called the loser of the race for his seat, but then an error was found and it flipped back to him. According to the CT Mirror, the win was previously called for Democrat Jim Jinks. A Wallingford town clerk told news outlets that her office found that votes hadn't been recorded in Connecticut's reporting system at a local elementary school. She wasn't sure if the error was human or machine-made, But GOP officials have expressed concerns over other counties that use the same software from Dominion voting systems. Despite the flip, the margin is so close that a recount will be conducted for his seat today. The U.S. Postal Service whistleblower in Pennsylvania says he's standing by a statement. He says he overheard superiors discussing backdating mail-in ballots.
Richard Hopkins works for the U.S. Postal Service as a mail carrier in Erie, Pennsylvania. He is now on unpaid leave. He says this is because of allegations he made that the local postmaster discussed a scheme to backdate mail-in ballots. And now Hopkins has released a video denying he fabricated his allegations. That's after the House Oversight Committee claimed on Tuesday that investigators told them Hopkins had recanted his statement.
I am right at this very moment looking at an article written by Washington Post. It says that I fabricated the allegations of ballot tampering. I'm here to say that I did not recant my statements. That did not happen.
He also said he would like the Washington Post to recant their article about him. The video was posted by James O'Keefe of Project Veritas, a watchdog group that first publicized Hopkins' accusations. O'Keefe also claims Hopkins was coerced by federal agents during a 4-hour interrogation without representation and says he has footage to prove it. Later Tuesday evening, O'Keefe released a clip he says is a recorded phone call between Hopkins and the USPS Office of the Inspector General agent Russell Sass.
And so let me make good on that promise right away, okay? This storm is getting crazy, right? And it's out of a lot of people's control. And so the reason they called me in is to try to harness that storm, try to reel it back in before it gets really crazy.
Hopkins says he understands. Sass then appears to say they called him in because senators and the Department of Justice are involved.
I'm not, well, I am trying to twist you a little bit because in that, believe it or not, your mind will kick in. We like to control our mind, and when we do that, we can convince ourselves of a memory. But when you're under a little bit of stress, which is what I'm doing to you purposely, your mind can be a little bit clearer. And we're going to do a different exercise too, to make your mind a little bit clearer. Okay?
There you go.
So, but this is all on purpose.
Roger.
I am not scaring you, but I am scaring you.
NTD has not been able to independently verify the authenticity of the recording. In an interview posted on Project Veritas, O'Keefe asks Hopkins if he thinks the federal agents have his back.
At this point, no.
Do you think these federal agents are really interested in investigating fraud?
Honestly, I don't think they are.
A GoFundMe page set up in Hopkins' name that raised over $130,000 was removed after the Washington Post published the story claiming he had recanted his accusations. A new fundraiser on the Christian crowdfunding site Give, has been set up for Hopkins, and it has raised even more than the GoFundMe page. Last week, Senate Judiciary Chairman Lindsey Graham said he would be calling on the DOJ to investigate Hopkins' claims after receiving an affidavit signed by Hopkins. Graham said officials in Pennsylvania should take allegations from Hopkins and others seriously before certifying a final outcome. Reporting by Grace Coulter, NTD News.
The governor of New York has ordered bars, restaurants, and gyms to close or alter their services at 10 p.m. starting this Friday. He says that bars and restaurants statewide will still be allowed to sell takeout, but not allow indoor or outdoor dining after 10 p.m. Any businesses with liquor licenses, he says, will also be required to follow that guideline, like bowling alleys. Democratic Governor Cuomo says he's doing this to bring down the number of rising cases. And in California, many businesses are still closed or at reduced capacity because of lockdowns. 2 small businesses are suing the governor because of it.
2 small businesses in Central California are suing Governor Gavin Newsom over his strict continuing lockdowns. The lawsuit claims the governor doesn't have the power to shut down businesses on his own. The attorney said an emergency doesn't give the governor authority to decide fundamental policy for the state. Only the legislature can make law, and that remains true even in a time of crisis. One of the businesses is Ghost Golf, a family-friendly mini-golf attraction. Except for 4 days in June, it's been closed since March because of Newsom's orders. The owner said, "Ghost Golf is my dream, and to have that dream put in jeopardy like this is unfair. And I know that I'm not the only small business owner in this situation. I just want to be able to open my business safely and get back to work." He still has to pay rent and other business expenses, even though he can't open the business. Restaurant Sol y Luna Mexican Cuisine is also suing. It's operating at only 25% capacity now. Their lawyer says there are some signs California courts are starting to take issue with Newsom's emergency powers, and he's cautiously optimistic about the suit's chances.
Up next, Hong Kong's opposition lawmakers staged a